Race day nutrition is the last part of the puzzle to running a fast half marathon or marathon. To get a fast time, you need to have good training, decent day-to-day eating habits, good sleep, the right shoes that work for you, and a positive mindset come race day. Assuming you have all of these things in place, all that's left to do is to boss your race day nutrition, and this can give you a fantastic race result. In this video, I'll share my personal race day nutrition strategy, which allows me to run faster half marathons and marathons. Before I kick off, I need to say I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a professional runner, but I am someone who has run a lot of half marathons and marathons over the years, and I find that following some general principles can really help me get a good time. Nutrition's highly personal to everyone, so make sure that you experiment and see what works for you. And with a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of trial and error, you will be able to get a really good half marathon or marathon time. To start, my race day nutrition begins a few days before race day itself in the form of carb loading. Now, when some people hear the term carb loading, they immediately think of shoving plates full of pasta and spaghetti down their throats in an effort to try and get those carbs in at the last minute. Don't worry, it's not as intense as that. What I do is 4 to 5 days prior to race day, I will shift my ratio of macronutrients heavily in the favor of carbohydrates, and I will reduce the amount of fats and proteins that I eat in my diet. And the reason for this is that I want to stock up on my glycogen stores. Glycogen is a form of energy that is stored in the liver and the muscles, and it's converted from carbohydrates, and it's the body's preferred source of energy for high intensity exercise like running a half marathon or a marathon. By shifting the ratio in favor of carbohydrates about 4 to 5 days prior to race day, I'm able to gradually stock my glycogen stores, and by doing this I'm able to put my body in the best position possible on race day with some fully stocked energy stores ready to hammer out a fast time. Moving on to race day itself, it goes without saying, please make sure you eat something. If you've ever gone for a really intense long run without having eaten anything, then you'll know that you can get pretty hungry pretty quickly. It's not very pleasant, and it can often really hinder your performance. So eating something is a must. For breakfast, I typically have a bowl of porridge with a chopped up banana in it, and sometimes I might have brown bread cooked into toast with a chopped up banana on it and peanut butter. I'll usually have this 2 to 4 hours before the race starts to give my body enough time to digest it and to make sure that I'm feeling fresh and ready to go when the race starts. Porridge and brown bread are good forms of complex carbohydrates. These take longer to digest than simple carbohydrates, which means you'll have a sustainable energy source to use throughout the long distance events of the half marathon and the marathon, so that you don't crash really early on. And the banana is a good mixture of complex and simple carbohydrates, which can really help give you an energy boost. Sometimes I may actually have another banana on the way to the race itself just to give me a little bit more energy. Number 2, and something that I simply couldn't do a race without, is coffee. I tend to have at least 2 cups of coffee on race day morning prior to setting off on the start line, and there's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, I'm a coffee fiend. I absolutely love the stuff. It's really nice, and I think it's a fantastic way to start the morning. Secondly, there's numerous benefits associated with consuming caffeine prior to doing an athletic performance like a half marathon or a marathon. Tons and tons of pro athletes use caffeine in a variety of sporting situations, and running a marathon or a half marathon is no different. There are many studies which back up the athletic benefits of consuming caffeine prior to activity, and the benefits include reducing your level of perceived exertion, allowing you to run harder for longer, and helping to stave off mid-race fatigue. Now, you don't have to drink coffee if you're not a coffee fan. You could have other sources of caffeine, including tea, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, a variety of different soft drinks. The only thing to be wary of if you're going to be drinking a sugary soft drink is that the sugar is a very simple carbohydrate. It's very quick to digest and give you an immediate energy burst. However, that has the tendency to cause a crash, which can negatively impact your mid-race performance. But experiment, see what works for you. Something that you can also experiment with, which I haven't done personally, is to use caffeine products during the marathon or the half marathon itself, like energy gels, chews, and bars which have caffeine in them. If you've done this before, let me know how you got on. Did you think it was effective having caffeine mid-half or full marathon? Next, during the run itself, I tend to have energy gels. gels. Now, energy gels are not everybody's cup of tea, but for me personally, I find that they're a really great on-the-go source of energy. They go down pretty well and they're easy to store in a race belt or in your pockets. I don't always have energy gels during half marathons, but sometimes I'll bring and have one, particularly if it's a really tough half marathon with lots of elevation gain, or if it's a trail half marathon, for example. The reason for having energy gels during the race is that the body's glycogen stores tend to get depleted after about 90 to 120 minutes of intense exercise, after which point the body then goes for using fat as a source of energy. Whilst we have loads of fat on our bodies, which is really useful for long distance, lower intensity efforts like ultra marathons, fat is not the most effective form of energy for a high intensity race like a half marathon or a marathon, because it takes the body a lot longer to access and use that energy in the race. My personal favorites are High Five Energy and Science in Sport energy gels. If you use energy gels, what are your favorites? Let me know down in the comments. During the race itself, I may have some liquids in the form of water, whatever's available really at the mid-race checkpoints. I won't always have liquids. It depends on the race I'm running, so I don't tend to have them during half marathons, and I find that I can get a good bit of hydration from energy gels. But I will usually have liquids during a longer event like a marathon, or if it's a really hot day, or if the terrain and the course is pretty challenging with lots of climbing or tricky terrain. The reason I try to avoid, if possible, drinking during a half marathon is that it can really slow you down and stop your momentum, as you have to come to a really slow pace to grab the drink. You have to then drink it, and then obviously you have to make sure that you discard of the cup or the bottle in a bin somewhere. And finally, when the race is over, I will reward myself with a post-race meal. It's very important to eat something substantial after a half marathon or a marathon, because these are massive efforts, they're really intense, and they can really take it out of you energy wise. And let's be honest, you can't beat a decent post-race meal. After the race, I'll have whatever I fancy, but I do try and prioritize proteins for muscle recovery and carbohydrates to restock depleted glycogen stores that have been used during the race. Pasta, chicken, fish, sandwiches, anything I can get my hands on really. Usually I find that it takes me a while to have an appetite to want a post-race meal after crossing the finish line. So I'll listen to my body, I'll eat when I feel like eating, and I definitely won't force anything too soon after crossing the finish line. That was my race day nutrition strategy for running faster half marathons and marathons in a nutshell. Let me know what works for you and what you eat for your race day nutrition for running half marathons and marathons. Do you have any top tips, any foods or drinks that you would recommend to other runners? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks very much for watching. I've been Craig, this is Running Cafe, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy running!